Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof. I was trying to get some things together, so I apologize for starting a little bit after the top of the hour. And it looks like because of the um, software that we use, the stream has been deleted from Facebook. So if for some reason you're trying to watch this from Facebook, you'll need to go to YouTube or find it from the archive on YouTube, or to watch it from the link that'll be shared by the Shadowproof account on Twitter. That's how you'll be able to tune in to this live broadcast. I welcome you all. I'm very upset with what just happened and how disconnected this ruling by the judge. Moments ago, we heard from Judge Vanessa Baretzer, and she denied the bail application by WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And this comes just 2 days after she ruled against the US government's extradition request. And she ruled against the extradition request by saying, and I actually have this handy because before she gave her ruling, I clipped a part of her own decision, her own words, why I believed that Vanessa Baretzer was going to grant bail today, why I think a lot of supporters, including people like Craig Murray, who have been cynical, were actually optimistic about what could unfold today with Julian Assange's bail application hearing. And so just let me take a moment here to pull this up and read to you what she had to say in her extradition decision. And again, I remind you that this is just 2 days ago. 2 days ago that she decided that Julian Assange should not be sent to the United States because if he was, he would find a way to commit suicide in a US prison due to his recurring depressive disorder and also the fact that he is on the autism spectrum and that there aren't enough resources in prisons to provide for the mental health of prisoners, and that the US system would fail to prevent Julian Assange from committing suicide. And so in her own decision, she wrote this, and she referenced a doctor who said that there are measures which could be taken to prevent suicide, including suicide risk assessments, staff training to identify suicide risk, and suicide watch. However, Mr. Assange undoubtedly has the intellect to circumvent these suicide preventative measures. In order to avoid suicide watch or increased isolation at HMP Belmarsh, he has already adopted a strategy of disguising his suicidal thoughts. Professor Koppelman is one of the doctors that assessed Julian Assange and gave testimony during the extradition trial, noted that he had been reluctant to discuss his mental state with prison staff, partly because he has been fearful of being placed in more isolated conditions or on constant watch. Dr. Blackwood, this was a doctor that testified during the extradition trial as well, although for the prosecution, said that during a review by a prison nurse in September 2019, Mr. Assange had stated that he had to be careful about what he said, as being placed on constant watch would be like torture to him. So he's been sent back to the Belmarsh prison. He's been sent back there, and we'll get to another aspect of this in a moment, which is the fact that he's being sent back there during a heightened state of lockdown during a pandemic. But he's being sent back to the prison, and this facility is one in which the judge recognizes Julian Assange could be hiding his own suicidal thoughts just so he could avoid the torture that he would endure from doctors if he were to reveal his true innermost feelings about what he is going through. And so there is a risk that Julian Assange having been denied his freedom, having been denied the ability to be released today because he is not going to be able to have contact, physical contact with his family, that's his fiance and his 2 children, because he is going to be denied that, there is a very real risk that he might be planning suicide within Belmarsh over the next couple of weeks with the appeal ahead, depending on how he feels about the prospect of prevailing in this appeal. He could commit suicide at Belmarsh, given the judge's own logic. And by her own logic, if she intended to prevent suicide by not sending Julian Assange to the United States, that same logic should be applied right now, and Julian Assange should be freed. He should be allowed. But let's go back. Let's pull back here. Let's just start from the very mere basis that Julian Assange, the defendant, got a decision from a district court that said the U.S. government's extradition was rejected. This was the argument of his attorney, Edward Fitzgerald, that mere fact alone should heavily weigh in his favor, especially since it was all around mental health reasons. It was all around what the risks would be to his health. And so that should have been a commanding thing. And she should have recognized that the terrain has shifted for Julian Assange. He's now in the position where he is winning against the United States government. It isn't as despondent and depressing as it was back in 2010 and 2012, when the war on WikiLeaks, when the way that they were using the courts internationally to go after him was in its initial phase of ramping up. So today, and the reason why so many supporters were feeling like they were going to see Julian Assange walk free from the Belmarsh prison, the reason they felt that way was because of how the judge ruled. And now she's saying that the U.S. government has to have an opportunity to appeal her own decision. What kind of judge does that? That's like undermining your own analysis and your own decision. That goes against everything that I consider reasonable. She wouldn't sit there and allow the prosecution to outline why her decision deserved to be appealed. She didn't want to hear the prosecutor, Claire Dobbin, enumerate the different reasons why she was wrong, but yet she's going to keep Julian Assange in the Belmarsh prison during a pandemic after he has won one stage of this legal battle, and she's going to say that the U.S. government must have an opportunity to appeal. That is contemptible behavior. To me, that is contemptible for her to do this, and to say that a man cannot be freed from prison because after the U.S. government lost its own case and did not prove that they could take care of their prisoners in the United States, she's going to turn around and say that the U.S. government gets another shot at proving. Maybe there's something wrong. Maybe she didn't see all of the evidence. Can you imagine that kind of deference for the defense? Can you imagine any judge being that deferential to defense attorneys? Oh, you know what? I think I possibly didn't look at this correctly, and I'm going to allow for the fact that maybe there's evidence that I should have allowed into the record. So you know what? I'm going to keep this person in prison, and or you know what? I'm going to give the U.S. government another chance to just prove that, you know, maybe there's something that they forgot a while ago that they would like to enter into the record, and it would fundamentally change the outcome of all of this. It's just contemptible in every way. So, you know, I typically do these live broadcasts. I've been doing these live broadcasts after every one of these proceedings. It's clear to me that the stakes of this appeal that will be upcoming of which we don't have any dates, but I presume it will happen over the coming weeks. Those stakes have risen. It's now it's not anymore just about overcoming an appeal. It's also about getting Julian Assange out of prison. So there were numbers that were put forward about the Belmarsh unit in which Julian Assange is being held. We know that there's evidence of an outbreak in the facility, much more evidence of COVID spreading than back in March when he applied for bail. And those numbers are, at least a couple dozen people are sick from the virus, according to the facility. It sounds like 3 people recently have tested positive, and also that there are dozens of staff members at the prison who are positive for COVID. There are people who have been indirectly exposed, and all of this is a risk. If you want to make sure that Julian Assange is going to make his appeal date and that the U.S. government has a shot at salvaging this case and eventually is able to bring Julian Assange to the United States, I'm going to tell you, you want to make sure that Julian Assange doesn't die from COVID-19 in a high security prison, which people have recognized, from people who run prison systems to human rights attorneys to lawyers that are part of this system, have advised that people in these prisons are very vulnerable to the spread, and that you should do something to alleviate the concentration of people in these facilities, so that the pandemic does not continue to rip through prisons. And the way you do that is you release people who do not need to be there. And that would especially apply to people who have not been convicted of crimes yet. They're just there for a pretrial, or they're there for proceedings of this nature. She gave no explanation for why a GPS tag would not work. She gave no explanation for why putting electronic monitoring on Julian Assange would not be something that could prevent him from going anywhere. If he is on house arrest at this address that was given to her with Stella, his partner, and his 2 children, she offered no reasoning as to how Julian Assange is going to flee this address that I know was going to have around the clock people following what's going on at this address every single hour. You all remember what happened with the Ecuador embassy. Does anybody think that if Julian Assange is on house arrest, it wouldn't be any different? There would be police there. There would be people who were in unmarked cars who were monitoring, who had ties to the security services. There would be people who undoubtedly were connected to the U.S. government. You could probably look up and down the nearby area and find that it was being staked out constantly. You really believe any of these people are going to let Julian Assange get into any vehicle? She referenced these distraction operations that WikiLeaks claimed that they were going to be able to conduct in order to protect Edward Snowden as he left Hong Kong and he traveled through Russia, and he was intending to go on to Ecuador, where he would be granted asylum. But the State Department revoked his passport, and he wound up stuck in a Moscow airport for about a month until he was granted asylum by the Russian government. She referenced these distraction operations, and she doesn't say what she thinks he's going to do to get around the fact that they're going to put something around his foot in order to make sure they know where he is every step of the way. She doesn't say, she claims that these support networks are going to smuggle him out like it's the Underground Railroad or something like that. And she doesn't say how this is going to happen. And the prosecutor raises the possibility that he's going to enter another embassy and restart the same saga that he went through with the Ecuador government. And the response that Edward Fitzgerald, his attorney, had to this idea was, why would he want to go through that all over again? Look at how that ended. It was awful. He was a victim of a change in politics in the Ecuadorian government. The Ecuadorian government bent to the will of the United States. The Ecuadorian government then was engaged in sustained harassment, a pressure campaign to force him to leave the Ecuador embassy. And the Ecuador government was willing to allow the FBI to take his legally privileged materials so that they could be used against him in piecing together this case. Even if they're not used at trial, they certainly have given hints to people who, we do not know what sort of role they may or may not have had in the development of this prosecution against Julian Assange. He was apparently, he lost his grooming kit, so he got dragged out and he looked like a madman deliberately because they didn't want him to be able to groom himself. They wanted this image of someone who looked unstable and looked like he was a hermit who has gone psychotic. And so he was sent to Belmarsh, and that's how that ended. Because he went to the embassy, he got 50 weeks of prison time from a judge. Why would he risk that again? Why would he risk this? He has 2 new children that I know he wants to be with, and he hasn't had a chance to be in their presence and to enjoy them during the course of this case. So why would that be any different? Why would that change? Why would it be that he wouldn't go to this home address and comply with the authorities? But Vanessa Baretzer finds that she has no responsibility to lay out how the reality exists now compared to how it existed 10 years ago when Julian Assange did not have this family in his life. And so we have the COVID, which I mentioned. We have the fact that the GPS tag is not good enough. We have this emphasis around Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks helping them. We have the support networks being seen as people who are going to help Julian Assange escape this appeal. We have also this specter of the Mexico government coming out and saying, we would like to grant Julian Assange political asylum, and we're going to see about doing that through the United Kingdom's own government, which was grossly misinterpreted by the prosecutors as an indication that after today, Julian Assange would just turn around and maybe go find a way to get to the Mexico embassy in order to abscond and not be here for the appeal. So let me get to some of your questions and your comments. I think that pretty well lays out what happened and transpired in this hearing. And listen, I think there's a cynical way we could look at this and approach it. But I went into this hearing expecting that Julian Assange was going to be allowed to leave Belmarsh prison, given the circumstances. And that didn't happen. And I think we have a right to be outraged by it. We shouldn't turn cynical and find a way to say, it was inappropriate for us to believe there was hope for Julian Assange. No, God damn it. The thing that we should think here is that the judge got this wrong. This was another gross example of abuse by the court system in the United Kingdom. There are many abuses in this case. This is one of the largest ones. The fact that this man has not been allowed to be in home confinement during the course of these proceedings is one of the grossest examples of abuse of the judicial power that this judge has in this case. So let me go through some of your comments. And again, thank you all for tuning in to this live stream this morning. It's very early here in the United States, but I know we have people from all over the world that are tuning in, who are very invested in following this case at every stage. So thank you. I see Belinda saying that we must never give up. I agree. We must never give up. I do not know that there's another option or opportunity for the Assange team to get bail. It comes from this judge. I don't know that they can go to the High Court of Justice and get bail from that appeal court, but that is where the appeal is going to be heard. It is a three-panel court, a three-judge panel that will be ruling on this in the coming weeks, if not months. And so let me just go through your, once again, if you've got people on Facebook who tend to follow this stream, they're not able to do so right now because Facebook deleted it automatically since I didn't start on time. So we lost our Facebook audience, but I have most of you. So thank you for tuning in this way. We'll have to share the archived version with people on Facebook who tend to follow this. I'm just scrolling through here, seeing if there are anything else. Art Northeast UK, so I'm so gutted and sad by this news. Free Julian Assange. Mary says, I'm sure Julian knew it was a strong possibility to remain in prison. He is strong, and so we are for him. Eliza says, someone got to her, meaning some government got to her. Julio says we must keep fighting for Assange until we will get him back to his family and us. And Art North says the judge has blood in her hands. I bet she will overturn the appeal and allow U.S. to win the appeal. So her decision is set. She can't go against her decision, but she does seem to be sabotaging her own decision and not defending it. It seems like typically a judge who ruled in a way against the government would also grant liberty to that defendant, especially if it came to an issue of mental or physical health. I mean, look at these circumstances. Does anybody want to be in a prison under these circumstances? Let's just take away the standard. I mean, right now, there is a virus ripping through prisons, and she's going to say that the Belmarsh facility is in a position to deal with this, when even the UK government itself is struggling to figure out what to do to contain this UK virus, the mutation that has been found in London and the surrounding areas. Homer said this is now all a charade. That judgment on Monday was all part of an act. And there's some more comments from you. Julio asks about the state of Assange's Ecuador citizenship if there's a change in the leadership during the election. There's an election coming up in February. So it's all possible. And maybe Ecuador could right its wrong, but the damage is done, and it's not going to be possible for them to re-up the asylum and get him back into the embassy. He's in the clutches of British authorities. He's stuck at this prison. He, even on home confinement, would be advised against going back to Ecuador's embassy for the asylum. And I've said this before, it bears repeating. The United Kingdom, along with the United States and other countries who do not condemn this, have effectively made it a crime to seek political asylum. They are treating that as jumping bail. Let's use their own imperial logic. If somebody was following a case of a Chinese defendant who was accused of a crime by the Chinese government, who entered an embassy, let's say perhaps in Hong Kong, and the Chinese government was upset that that person had fled what they considered to be a legitimate criminal case, do you think that the US government or UK government or most other governments in the world wouldn't say that that person was escaping persecution and deserves to be able to have the institution of asylum, and that they were being targeted for challenging the Chinese government, and so they do not have to subject themselves to prosecution? And this is what Julian Assange was trying to say to the world. He was trying to convince the British government, and he convinced the Ecuadorian government. He was trying to say that no matter what the case is that's brought against me, I am a victim, I am a target of political prosecution. So I should be able to enter this embassy, and they should be able to give me asylum. And I should not be seen as a criminal, because what is behind these Swedish sexual allegations, this case that they continue to bring against me, is a attempt by Sweden to tie me up in legal limbo, that there's not really much of a case here, but they want to tie me up in legal limbo. So I'm there for the United States to snatch. They might be happy with me being tied up by this case in Sweden, but if that ends, the U.S. might say, "Oh, now that you're done with him, we'd like to have him and bring him to the United States." A lot of that feeling, a lot of those fears were vindicated on in April 2019, when he was expelled and arrested, and when it was revealed that as early as December 2017, there were charges that were drawn up against Julian Assange in order to go after him, and that they wanted him for the disclosures that were provided to WikiLeaks from Chelsea Manning. And so a lot of his fear about how this could come back to haunt him, it's all come out to be true. What we saw numerous media outlets treat as conspiracy theory turned out to be true. You tell me, of all the things that Assange has complained about and suggested would happen to him and other people at WikiLeaks, how much of it has been unfounded? I'd say that a lot of it has turned out to be exactly what the United States wanted to do to him and this media organization that had the courage, the temerity to go after and challenge the U.S. government by publishing these documents, and to continue to publish government documents even after you had people who were targeted, after you had people whose social media communications were seized by the courts for a grand jury investigation, after you had people put on lists, after you had a kind of war on WikiLeaks that is well known. You tell me how many of these people have been completely outlandish and wrong in their assessment of what the U.S. would do. A lot of this has been vindicated. So let's get to, I think in closing here, I'd like to just say that the cynical view of why the judge ruled the way she did on January 4th is one that I believe more people should entertain after today. So, to put it this way, back on Monday, when we got this ruling, she noted all the reasons related to the U.S. prison system why Julian Assange should not be extradited. And we took that to be a really great development, a great break. Julian Assange dodged a bullet. And we were upset. We were very angry about the other parts of the ruling, the other 90% of the decision that suggested that the criminal allegations against Julian Assange are largely well-founded, which we do not agree is the case. But she ultimately ruled in his favor, and the extradition request was denied. But there were people who looked at that after a while, and instead of giving her credit, said this was a cop-out. She didn't want to have the responsibility of authorizing this decision, and knowing that there was a chance that Julian Assange might go to the United States, and with his commitment and his mental health deteriorating, make the decision to kill himself in a U.S. prison. And so, because she didn't want to have this man on her conscience, because when you look at what has happened with this case, this all comes down to what Vanessa Baretzer wants. This case is all about her. She has made this all about herself. It's like that saying goes, you're so vain, You probably think this case is about you. And Vanessa, all along, has not made this about Julian Assange. It's about her. Whenever she talks about Julian Assange, we should just know that in the back of her head, she's thinking about how this is going to reflect on her as a judge, someone who wants to have a really good future career in the British justice system. She's not that old. She's someone who would like to continue to have a good reputation. And she doesn't want, this is the biggest case that she's ever been attached to in her judicial career. And she knows that everyone's going to always remember her as the judge who was involved in this case. The last thing she wanted was to be the one who was responsible for the death of Julian Assange, because everyone for the rest of her life would always suggest that she had made an inappropriate decision to extradite her to the United States. So what did she do? She denied it. And now what is she doing? She's hoping that the High Court of Justice bails her out. She's not bailing Julian Assange. She wants to be bailed out and have the High Court of Justice say that she was wrong about this. And if they say she's wrong, she's willing to accept it, because at least she's not the one who's making the ultimate decision to extradite Julian Assange to the United States. She doesn't want the accountability. She doesn't want to take responsibility. She doesn't want to own this decision. But she does want to say that she believes Julian Assange probably committed the crimes and is not a journalist. So, she's a coward. She's basically a coward. She doesn't want to take any responsibility for the role that she has in the British judicial system. And so, this is kind of a punt. A rule against the extradition on Monday, a rule against bail on Wednesday. He'll remain in prison. The U.S. government will have another attempt to fight. They'll be able to try and salvage this case by assuring the High Court of Justice that there will be services in the United States for Julian Assange, or maybe looking at the evidence that was before the court, they'll try to prove Julian Assange really won't go to a supermax prison. He won't go to ADX Florence, which is a hellhole where people with mental health issues have been known to do things like digest shards of glass, that they've done self-harm and mutilated themselves in order to get out of solitary confinement conditions. So maybe they'll be able to show that this brutality that is well known throughout the world isn't a kind of future that Julian Assange will face if he's brought to trial. And I don't think that we should believe a word that they say when they make these assurances that we know they're going to make to the High Court of Justice in the coming weeks or months. But I think Vanessa is hoping that the High Court of Justice bails her out. And so Julian Assange was denied bail today. He's not going to be able to see his fiancée Stella. He's not going to be in a temporary home. He's not going to be with his children tonight. He's not going to go to sleep outside of a prison cell for the first time in several years. He's not going to be free from confinement for the first time in about 10 years, because the Ecuador embassy conditions were considered arbitrary detention by the United Nations. He's not going to be free. He is going to remain a jailed journalist, a persecuted individual, because Vanessa Baraitser doesn't want to take the chance that she alienates people who are in her professional circle, who believe that this man should go to the United States. But she doesn't want to be responsible for his death if he would go to the United States and decide to commit suicide. She's basically taking the Barack Obama way out. She wants other people to have a stake in this. And then if a whole group of people can have it, then it's no single person's fault when something terrible happens to Julian Assange in the future. So that's where we find ourselves. That's where we are today. Just the sheer cowardice of Vanessa Baraitser, who believes that Julian Assange is a criminal and not somebody who has been pursued because he engaged in journalism that exposed war crimes and torture by the United States. But I would submit to you, imagine if this had been what happened with the bail application on Monday. Imagine if the defense had gone forward and allowed this to be part of that day's event. Then the headlines around what Baraitser did as a judge would not be so rosy. The sort of mercy that she was alleged to have shown Julian Assange, I don't think she would get the kind of credit she received on that day if she had also denied bail in addition to rejecting the extradition request. So I don't believe that there is much more to say. Fascists can be cowards, though, Sandra. Fascists can be cowards. Sandra says Vanessa Baraitser is not a coward, but a fascist. But I would say to you that fascists are capable of being cowards. They are capable of being owned by state institutions. They are capable of being captive to the people they answer to. And it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't change the struggle against fascism to say that they are cowards. But they're cowards because they are part of these institutions and they are expected to serve them, and they wake up every day and they have a certain ideology. And yes, what you said, Redreamer, she's a fascist. She can be a fascist and be owned, and therefore that makes her complicit and a coward. And so this authoritarianism, let me put it that way, this authoritarianism on the part of the judge is something that is abominable. I expect that all the organizations that have objected to this case up to this point are going to be furious with this decision today. I will promote and share whatever they have to say. This is indefensible. If you reject the extradition request, you cannot keep Julian Assange in a Belmarsh prison. I mean, I wouldn't have allowed it. If he had the extradition request denied. I wouldn't have tolerated it in my mind, let me put it that way. But I would have expected it. If the extradition request had been approved by the judge, then denying bail to him during the appeal would make sense, just based upon the logic of how the case was unfolding. But he won this phase. He won the phase in the district court. He won the phase. He should be out of Belmarsh. I don't know that there's anything else to add. Let me see if you have any more questions or comments that are worth including. We'll take a moment to point out the gross double standard, which a lot of you know, but let me just make it a part of this video. People who committed the massacre in Nisour Square in Iraq have been pardoned by Donald Trump. They are war criminals. There are people in the United States who have been implicated in war crimes in Iraq. As Steely Steve is mentioning, the people in collateral murder video are still free. They have never been put on trial for violating the rules of engagement, or just put it simply, being so lusty for blood that they killed and targeted children and people who were completely innocent, and also killed Reuters journalists in the collateral murder video. They've never been brought to justice. There are examples, countless examples of torture in the war, the Iraq war logs. There are examples of assassination. There are night raids that you can link soldiers to that were fatal and awful in the Afghanistan war logs. We have examples of atrocities in the diplomatic cables. We see interference from the U.S. government when it comes to investigating CIA torture and rendition in the U.S. diplomatic cables. We see evidence of drone strikes and the effort to hide the responsibility that the U.S. has for those drone strikes in the U.S. cables. We see all of those people who are implicated in that carnage walking free. They are not pursued. As far as the rule of law goes, there is no rule that they are expected to submit to after they commit their violence. But for Julian Assange, we are told that he flouted the law when he entered the Ecuador embassy. We are told that he continues to remain committed to flouting the law. We are told that the journalist who exposed this conduct by the U.S. And who published material that was given to him by Chelsea Manning in order to expose these abuses and these crimes, we are told that he is the one who must be held accountable. We are applying a standard to Julian Assange that is higher than the people who are responsible for the killing of people in countries in the Middle East, and he is expected to abide by a higher standard than the people who are guilty of being involved in torture. This is wrong. This simply should not be the way that things are. Nonetheless, I know that someone will immediately chime in. This is the way that it always has been in the United States. And yes, there's evidence of this double standard going back decades. That doesn't mean we have to accept it. And to say that you're not surprised may mean that you become a little used to it. And I think today it's a moment like this that makes that dynamic more raw for you, that you know that Julian Assange is going to be treated differently than somebody who has taken life, somebody who was engaged in murder because they were doing so on behalf of the U.S. military, is allowed to much more range than Julian Assange. So my furnace is kicked on because it's winter time and we're cold, and the decision of the judge is very cold, and it is something that we'll all be sitting with throughout the rest of the day. I've gone for about 40 minutes plus, so I'm going to wrap up here. And I want to thank you all for your support and your continued interest in this case. And again, that feedback is my furnace that is kicked on. So I'm going to just put up this banner and let you know that if you'd like further updates on where this case goes next, to subscribe to thedissenter.substack.com. I encourage you to go to my Twitter. After I get done with this stream, I'm going to shoot out a link that has a coupon, which can get you 50% off for an annual subscription to the newsletter. Please subscribe by clicking on that link to make sure that you benefit from the coupon and get 50% off of what it is annually if you would like that newsletter. But to quickly answer your question about what happens next, we have the appeal that will be heard by the High Court of Justice. It'll be filed by the U.S. government, then the defense will respond. There will be a hearing. I expect this to happen over the next few months. It should not be a year before we see this happen. It should happen in 2021. Maybe by April, May, you'll be seeing me do this. There'll be possibly multiple days where I'll be getting up very early again. And nobody is more tired of this than Julian Assange, but I'd say that somewhere past the number 100, there are journalists who are in the United States, the very few that are covering this. There are people in Australia who are getting tired of having to get up very, very early or having to stay up until midnight and 1 a.m. to cover this case that should have been over long ago and should have never even been started. I think the fight pivots, if I can quickly finish as I'm having to deal with this furnace in the background. I think the fight pivots to pardon Snowden, we should pardon Edward Snowden, but pardon Julian Assange if Donald Trump could come out in his favor and do this, or we got to convince Joe Biden and his Justice Department to drop the charges, to drop this appeal, to no longer invest resources and energy in bringing this case against Julian Assange. So that's where things stand for everyone who is involved in trying to uphold press freedom. Thank you for tuning into this broadcast. I'll be back again soon on this channel with more interviews and updates related to this case, as well as coverage of other whistleblower stories. Until then, I'll see you around.